guess if you want to do your intro. Yeah.
Okay, and just quickly correct.
We're live on YouTube now.
Oh, okay. Oh, right. Okay. We are now live on YouTube. I'm sure you all know the usual rules apply. Please address each other correctly. We are now live. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And welcome members, officers, any members of the public who have joined us for the executive meeting this evening. Item 1, apologies. Do we have any apologies?
Thank you, Chairman. There are no apologies.
Okay, thank you. Members of the executive, are you happy for me to sign the minutes of the 16th of February, our last meeting? Okay, thank you. Okay. Do we have any declarations of interest for any of the items that we're going to be discussing this evening? And that is obviously the members of the executive, but if any members plan on talking, then if they want to make any declarations. Okay, I would just say again, I'm on 2 screens. There's more people than I can get on one screen, so it may be that you either put your hand up electronically or just do the old-fashioned shout. Okay, so I'm not hearing anything. Okay, all right. Right, item 4, questions from the members to the leader or portfolio holders. Councillor Garrett.
Thank you, Leader. As we all know, fitness instructors are currently charged to run their classes in our green spaces. More than ever, as we come out of lockdown, we want to help support these residents to keep fit. I was wondering what the Leader thinks we can do to help support those who run their classes on our green spaces. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Actually, this is something that came up in discussion with Councillor Jennings-Evans, portfolio holder for Green Spaces. We obviously, you know, the health and well-being of residents is really, really important just now. We want to do everything we can to encourage that. My understanding is that we have a set of fees that are charged for any professional who wants to run fitness classes in our parks for obvious reasons, use of the park, etc. But I think that it would be reasonable that we waive fees up to a certain level. I think the fees go up to 15 people X number of times. It's 1-to-1. Then there's classes up to 15, then there's classes of 16 and above, and I think the maximum is 35. I think it wouldn't be unreasonable that we, for say a period of 6 months, which would cover the summer, take us through to September, if we were to waive those fees. I would stress that part of the collecting of the fees is that the person holding the class has to fill in a form to register, because they've got to make sure that they've got public liability insurance, etc. They're bona fide. That would still have to continue, but I think that would be a really good solution to allowing people to use the parks, fitness classes, etc. that would help with that. So I'd be more than happy for the officers to look at waiving the fees for 6 months on classes up to 15.
Thank you. That would be very much appreciated. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. All right, Councillor Deitch, and then Councillor Bates.
Thank you, Leader. Now, we know that there are a lot of businesses on their knees as a result of the pandemic and the lockdowns. My good friend Mark Gordon in Bagshot has explained to me that the cost of pavement licenses is an issue to the hospitality sector, especially pubs, cafes and restaurants. I know this council's keen to assist businesses in any way that it can. So I was wondering if there's anything that you can do to help.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I think everybody in the chamber would agree that businesses, particularly in the hospitality industry, have absolutely been hammered. The government allows councils to charge up to £100 for a temporary pavement licence, but the significant thing of that is up to £100. Right? I think one of the things we could do is we could waive the £100 fee for anyone already with a temporary pavement licence that wants to renew. So if they've already paid, I mean, they didn't get value for money, did they? They paid £100 and were on lockdown about 10 of those 12 months. Okay, I'm not suggesting that we refund that money, but I do think that we could allow them another year of without having to pay another £100. We could waive the £100 fee for any business erecting a temporary structure to comply with the COVID recovery rules. So outside only from April for a year, we could do that. And the third thing we could do is we could waive the £100 fee for anyone applying for a new pavement licence. Again, we've got to encourage the Minister Jenrick was saying that the first stage of recovery for the economy is going to be outside trading. Right? So I think that we should do everything we possibly can to encourage and support businesses. All right. I'm not going to say it's going to be a fantastic boon for all the businesses. They don't have to pay £100, but it's another thing we can do to actually support businesses. So I'm more than happy for us to waive that. That would have to go through Councillor Bates's licensing committee. So we can say the budget is clear for that, but it would have to be done through Councillor Bates' licensing committee. So
if I could just come back very briefly, Leader. Sure. I think that's fantastic, and I'm sure Mark Gordon would be, and other businesses would be delighted to hear that. If I could just say though that if we could do it as soon as possible, because we've got the good weather coming, hopefully. Let's not put any unnecessary delay in, if that's okay.
Well, I don't know if Councillor Bates is on the meeting tonight. He is. Okay. Well, in that case, I'm sure he got your message as loud and clear as I did. Right? Yeah, there would be no point in bringing this in 6 months from now, would there? So,
no.
Thank you.
ASAP. Thank you, Leader.
Of course, he is actually on because I said he was speaking next, and then Councillor Tapper.
Yes, thank you very much. Just on that one, I know this is meant to be executive, but the last question was actually a non-executive question. And just to reassure Councillor Deach that, in fact, if he'd have opened his emails from literally just about 10 minutes ago, I'm sure he hasn't had time, he will see that it is, in fact, on the agenda for next Wednesday's meeting to have discussion specifically on that. He's a member of the committee, so I look forward to hearing his comments on Wednesday. The question that I did want to ask was actually entirely different. And it has been brought to my attention today, and also Councillor Garrett, that in regard to people needing to be put up in Slough for bed and breakfast purposes. So I guess my question is, how many people are we having to put up in Slough? How common is this for local residents needing bed and breakfast to be temporarily housed in Slough? And how long does that have to go on for?
Okay, thank you. Would Councillor Hawkins like to pick up on this one?
Thank you, Leader. I don't have the figures to hand. I do know that from my discussions with Mrs. Rickard, that if it's a family, then it is accommodation is found locally. But I think it's for people who are single people who they tend to put in Slough. But I can come back to Councillor Bates unless Mrs. Rickard is on this call. I'm not sure if she is or not.
She is, yeah.
Oh, she is. Okay, Mrs. Rickard.
I didn't know this question was coming up, so I haven't got the answer. But putting families in bed and breakfast in Slough is an absolute action of last resort. We do put people there, but wherever possible, we try to get them into temporary accommodation locally. Because the problem with putting families in bed and breakfast in Slough is that you break all their family connections. If they've got children, they can't get them to school, they can't get to work. So it's an absolute action of last resort. And I will get the figures for you, but it's not something we do as a preference. We try to get them into temporary accommodation, particularly families locally.
Okay, I think Councillor Bates, it was kind of a 2 or 3 part question. That can you just make sure that Mrs.
Yeah, sorry, I'm sorry if it's been misunderstood. I know I said families. I meant to say the word households. That was what I meant to be I'm particularly concerned in regard to, I'm aware that families are not, but it's really where households with maybe single people who have illness, mental health or whatever are put up in Slough. So the question is really, how many does that, how many people are there impacted? How regular is it? And how long do they have to tend to be in Slough before they are then housed either privately or by this council? It does obviously concern me that is quite some distance for people who have their connections here, but for statutory reasons have to be housed in Slough. So I'd be grateful if that could be looked into and I could have the answers in writing. Thank you.
I think Councillor Hawkins and Mrs. Rickard will come back to you. I think, and also,
of course, thank you.
As per our working arrangement, we'll reply to you, Councillor Bates, but everyone will get the answer. It will go to all councillors, whether they're at this meeting or not. Okay, Councillor Tapper.
Thank you, Leader. My question actually harks back to what Councillor Deitch was talking about, the pavement licences. Am I right in thinking that if the tables and chairs are sited on private land, a pavement licence is not required?
You know, you have an ability to ask these very, very technical questions. Luckily, that's what we have the officers for. Okay. Pavement licenses, is one needed if it is on private land? I'm guessing, to be honest, you know, pavement license, even if it's private land, you're still bringing people on, and it's actually to do with things like insurance. So, no.
Leader, I'm just wondering whether, because we have Mr. Passion on the call, whether he's able to respond to that question. Otherwise, I was going to offer a response. Okay, Mr. Passion.
Yeah, I'm afraid probably Mr. Roberts probably would be better to answer that because I haven't. I don't know enough detail about that at the moment. But I would have thought that the pavement license probably will be required for if it's on private land. I mean, essentially, it is, as you say, it's to promote safety. But I'm quite happy to go back and look at the legislation.
Okay.
I would be grateful if you,
Roberts, I don't know if you know more definitively, but if not, I'm happy to go with that if Councillor Tapper is.
Yes, if you could investigate the situation and get back to me, I'd be grateful. Situation affects Heatherside. The retail units there. The actual private land that is a part of the retail units is defined not by the shop front, but by the overhang above from the apartments which are associated with the retail units. And according to the land registry, the vertical drop from the far edge of the overhang to the pavement below encloses an area which is entirely private land and belongs to the retail unit. It is not a public pavement, even though the public tend to walk across it, obviously.
Right, okay.
Legally, it is private land.
Right, okay, thank you. I should also just clarify, we're talking about waiving £100 fee for the pavement licence. We are not in any way, shape or form talking about that means a free-for-all, right? People still have to apply in exactly the same way. They have to get their licence. They have to comply with things like, you know, it is not tolerable that wheelchairs or prams are obstructed and have to walk on roads in order for you know, outside pavement licenses to happen. So the same normal rules apply, but for 12 months we'll waive the £100 fee, I think is a reasonable position. All right, so we're not talking about loosening the rules in any way, shape or form. All right, we obviously want to be as accommodating as possible to get our economy back up and running, but that's not at the expense of anybody having to walk on a road to get round chairs and tables. So.
And Leader, just to clarify the answer to the question. So this was intended for use on highways land. And the reason I know that is because there was a debate very early on about whether this would be administered by Surrey County Council as the Highways Authority, or whether it would be for boroughs and districts. And that was clarified that boroughs and districts would be administering the scheme, even though it was on highways land. So my understanding is that this is not required for private land, but I'm sure Mr. Passion will be able to clarify that after the meeting.
Okay, thank you. Okay, right. Any other questions for myself or any members of the executive? No? Okay, thank you. Right, item 5, they have the annual plan. This is for 21-22. It's a continuation of the delivery of our services and the standards that we set. It's through the prism of health and well-being and the recovery from COVID. So there are some new targets in there to do with that. And of course, the environment, which is going to be a major point in our next item. The key projects and targets are all listed there. This plan was considered by the Performance and Finance Scrutiny Committee, and their comments have been included. I'm pleased to see. So thank you very much for the feedback and the constructive comments in there. Are there any questions on the annual plan? Okay. All right. Again, so Councillor Tapper, yes.
Yes, thank you, Leader. I'd like to refer to on it's page 6 of the actual attachment, Annex A. Item COM3, air quality. I'd like to ask a question about this. It says in here about the monitoring should continue across the borough to ensure levels of pollutants continue to be compliant with national standards. Now, it was my understanding that in fact we are not compliant with national standards, particularly where the Blackwater Valley Road is concerned, although I know we have withdrawn monitoring, as far as I understand it, from the Blackwater Valley Road. So how we know whether there is air pollution on the Blackwater Valley Road that complies or does not, I'm not sure. Perhaps someone can advise me on that as to how we are actually carrying out the monitoring in the areas where we are likely to not be in compliance, so that we can assure that we are in compliance with national standards. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Again, a technical question. Do we want to go straight to Mr. Passion for this one, or would the portfolio holder like to jump in? Councillor Mansfield?
I think I'd ask Mr. Passion for a reply, please.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Passion?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yes, we did bring an air quality report through to the last PNF committee. I'm quite happy to circulate that. There's extensive air quality monitoring that's carried out throughout the borough. In fact, we've been doing it for well over 20 years. We've got a fixed monitoring point plus around about 36 passive tubes that monitor on a monthly basis for nitrogen dioxide. Monitoring is still continuing on the Blackwater Valley Road. Of course, this is done by Rushmore Borough Council and Surrey Heath. But I'm very happy to resend the report with the figures. The last monitoring we had, most monitoring, I think of almost all the monitoring locations we have were compliant with the relevant standards. But quite happy to resend that.
Okay, thank you. So good news, Councillor Tapper. We are in actual fact still monitoring. I'm not sure where you heard we'd stopped monitoring, because that was news to me. I'm glad to hear that we are still continuing to monitor the Blackwater Valley Road. Councillor Edward Hawkins.
Thank you, Leader. I think my views about us having to do the Blackwater Valley, given the paucity of residential, are well known. And I note that it expires at the end of March next year. Can we please start putting into trail a similar exercise for the M3, which cuts right the way through our residential areas, going from so the edge of Camberley, right the way through past the villages. And all of us suffer from the impacts of the M3. Now, I know we get technical before Councillor Tapper jumps in on me and starts talking about milligrams of X, Y, Z. I have no idea what they are. And Graham, whenever he talks about it, he just goes straight over me. But the concept is there that we need to be pushing for a form of air monitoring. We do some, but we need a traffic management plan and to get this agreed with Highways England. And we have 12 months to get that in place before the Blackwater Valley one expires. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. Okay, I think you were just looking for my agreement that we are committed to improving that. Okay, I think I'm happy to do that. Okay, Councillor Gallagher.
Thank you. Slightly odd one here, but I'm looking at page 9 under SHBC 6A, under outcomes at the end. It says improving rates of childhood and maternal obesity. I'm just wondering why the focus there is purely on maternal obesity when it states that in Surrey Heath we can see 62.2% of adults are estimated to be overweight or obese, and it doesn't actually tell us whether they are maternal mothers or who they are. It just seems a very odd statement to make.
So you're picking up on the word maternal.
Yeah.
Okay. Everybody agrees children. Okay. All right. Okay. Right. Mr. Roberts, who would you suggest is the best person to talk to that point? Why have we picked out maternal as opposed to family or adult?
Thank you, Leader. I think possibly the executive head of community, Mr. Passion, and if not, I can certainly offer a view on that.
Okay, Mr. Passion.
Yeah. Well, the main focus is going to be on obesity generally, but also with childhood obesity. Essentially, I've reproduced what was in the Surrey the health and wellbeing plan and what was required for us looking at obesity. I'd look at the wording again to see if technically we've got something wrong there. But essentially, it's should we be doing some work on tackling obesity within the borough? That is essentially what that annual plan is looking at.
Okay. Well, I think
but I can look at the wording.
Yeah, I think first of all, Councillor Gallagher, well caught, right, to pick out that one word. All right. I think I would join you probably in the point that you were making. Right. It's one thing to say if there's some evidence that it needs to be towards maternal and children, okay. But if it is just the wording happens to say that, then I think I agree with your general point, which it needs to be tackled no matter what is the gender, sexual orientation, age, whatever. It needs to be across the borough or whole resident, doesn't it? So if Mr. Passion is going to look at that I'm happy with that. Okay.
Yeah. Yes, Chairman. Happy to look at that, and as I say, the attention is again to tackle obesity generally.
Right. Okay. Have you got any more weird ones like that, Councillor Gallagher?
No, I mean, it was merely observations, really. I mean, if one assumes that it's the mum who goes and buys the food, maybe there needs to be some education there. But then, of course, it comes down to junk food being cheaper than healthy food, etc. The fact that the medical model does not teach anything about health or diet. So, you know, I could go on forever. I won't, but thank you.
Well, the subject and the issue of obesity in the UK population is, let's face it, is far, far larger than Surrey Heath Borough Council, right? But that's not to say that we shouldn't be doing absolutely every single thing that we can, right? And I know, and I think I'm reflecting the views strongly held and expressed by the chamber, not just by the executive, that going forward, our priorities have to be health and well-being and the environment. Everything should be viewed through those two prisms. Okay, and that's certainly the context of the conversations that I've been having with our new chief exec, Mr. Roberts. Okay, so I think that's good. All right, any other questions before we move on to, okay, all right. I'm going to do this. I'm going to ask the members of the executive. Oh, sorry, Councillor Bates.
Thank you, Chairman. I was also going to talk about the obesity, actually, because I think I saw on there that one of the action points is for relevant officers and members to attend a workshop on obesity. And I just wonder whether, in light of that, we can also look at this issue of life expectancy, which is significantly different across the wards. And it's a well-known statistic that there are many years difference between Old Dean and St Paul's, for example, even though they're adjoining wards. And one of the reasons for that, although by no means the only reason, is regarding obesity. So I noted there was a workshop to take place for relevant members and officers, and I would just maybe ask that the points from that are circulated more widely to other members. The other question I was going to raise was on page.
Sorry, just let me just nail that one down first, if you don't mind. Okay, there was two. I think the point, can that workshop include information on life expectancy and what affects life expectancy, not just obesity? Okay, I think that just if that was to give some air to that, just for the relevant members to know. And the second point I think Councillor Bates was making is, can that be spread more widely? All right. Again, sorry, Mr. Passion, this is I guess a lot coming at you this evening, but are you okay with those 2 points?
Yes, very happy with that. As I say, we'll be working very closely with public health colleagues on this, and yes, we'll certainly take that on board.
Good. Okay, I've just seen in the chat from Mrs. Rickard that the difference in the two wards you just mentioned is 10 years. Yeah. Okay, that's shocking, isn't it? That's shocking. So. Right, Councillor Bates, sorry, you were going on to a second.
No, I entirely agree, it's shocking, and that's something that needs to be addressed as a priority, not just by this council, but county as well. The second question was entirely different and is on page 18. And the third point down relates to appeals dismissed against the council's refusal of planning permission. Now, before the Performance and Finance Scrutiny Committee, I actually asked about this and submitted some written questions about it, because I want to try and understand whether the issue here is members' decision-making, or whether it is officers at a lower level, or whatever it is. Where is the key issue here in regard to appeals? I suspect there'll be some of both. And at the meeting, it was reported that the figures needed to be rechecked. I couldn't find to hand a further update on that. So at this moment in time, even though I submitted it a week before the meeting, as far as I can tell, it hasn't actually been received. And it's actually quite an important point for us to understand where the issues are regarding appeals. There will always be some appeals that we lose as a council, and we accept that. But the issue is to identify and minimise them as far as we can, and the lessons that are learned as a result of that. So I would still appreciate an answer to those points, even though it was a number of weeks ago.
Okay, Mrs. Rickard, is that for you?
Yes, it is for me, and I do apologise because I thought we had answered it. So I will sort that out tomorrow.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Councillor Gallagher.
Sorry, I have thought of another slightly obscure question. Obviously, the council is promoting the COVID vaccine, as one would expect. I'm just wondering, though, there's a lot of talk about COVID passports and so on and so forth, and I just wondered what the council's position or feeling is, because there will be quite a few residents who, for medical and other reasons, would not be able to take the vaccine, and I would worry that we would be creating a sort of two-tier system of residents, possibly in shops and so on and so forth, if we, supported a COVID passport type system in our area.
Yeah, I think, Councillor Gallagher, you may not like my answer, but we have no view on COVID passports. If the law requires us to do something, we would do it. If it requires us not to do something, we would not do that. We will, of course, comply with the law. But that, as you know, this is questions for the executive, and our Prime Minister, Mr. Johnson, hasn't actually consulted me on my view of COVID passports. So, if you don't mind, I'm just going to keep that to myself. But I can tell you that the council has no view on COVID passports at this time. Councillor Rise. Oh, okay, right. Okay, right. There being no more questions.
Leader, my apologies. I thought Councillor Rise was asking a question, but he's
he waved you. Okay.
You're ahead of me.
So, members of the executive, we're being asked the recommendation is that we're requested to approve the proposed annual plan for 21-22. Are we in agreement? Okay, thank you. That's passed. All right. I've had a very timely reminder that me talking about waiving temporary pavement licenses and dropping fees on fitness in the park for professionals and groups under 15 has no effect whatsoever until the executive has actually agreed that, which is absolutely right. So I'm just going to back up and ask the members of the executive, are they happy for the instructors, the officers to be instructed as we've discussed? Is that agreed? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. All right. Okay. So, Mr. Roberts, thank you for your note. But no, we're not looking for a paper to come back to the next one. We're looking for that to be implemented. I understand there's a budget implication on this, but from the discussions that we've had, this is something that can be worked through, and we can manage with the lack of income that's going to come from this for the period. Okay, thank you. All right, so moving on to the next one, item 6, bids for funding from the Local Community Improvement Fund. Okay, Councillor Lewis, do you want to take us through this one?
Yes, certainly, Leader. This is the bids for the funding from the Local Community Improvement Fund for non-parish wards. As you'll see from the recommendations, we've had 5 bids received, and we're recommending 4 to be paid the award and 1 for no funding. This is our first outing of the new pooling of the SIL funds. We've taken the full amount of all the SIL funding and calculated the percentage of that figure that the bids come to, and we've extended that percentage across each of the ward's funds. The bids and the reasons for the recommendations are detailed in Annex A, and we have 2 options: to agree the bids for funding or not. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, any questions for Councillor Lewis on any of the ones? Okay, Councillor Alloway, you're going to be first. Yep. Okay, Councillor Alloway.
Thank you, Leader. Back in August last year, and in fact the executive meeting I think was the 21st of July actually, but the following meeting the points were raised by myself, and you can watch the YouTube recording, that I'd asked that the 85% that is taken by borough for the SIL fund is open to wards to be able to request further amounts for their projects to support development in the area. I asked for a clarification that actually was going to be the case now.
Sorry, Councillor Jenny Evans, I think that's your microphone. Thank you. Can you mute? Thank you. Yeah, sorry, Councillor Alloway, go ahead.
Yeah, so the question was that the 85% collected by borough into their funds would now be available as a pool for all wards to put forward requests for works to be carried out to support the development that they've taken. For some reason, I don't see that happening. All I see here is a pooling of 15% from wards into a big pool. I can't imagine that any ward couldn't spend 15% of its SIL, so why would you be pooling it? And I think, yes, definitely, I asked for the clarification to avoidance of doubt that the 85% is now going to be open for spending and bids from wards, as opposed to using that money for projects that have no meaning for those wards that have accepted a high level development, i.e. the 85% seems to be spent on A30, Cambridge Town Centre, and other highways projects related to that area. And yet, a place like ours, which has taken 400 odd houses, 1,000 extra residents, are still left with dangerous roads to cross by those residents to get their kids to school. So is this scheme going to be open to the 85%, or is it not? Is the 85% not going to be open for wards to request funding for projects?
Okay. All right. Okay. I think we've got your question, Councillor Alloway. Yep. Before I go to Mrs. Rickard, who knows this stuff inside out, I think it's just worth just a bit of clarification on what you were saying there. So houses are built in wards. Developers over a certain size of houses have to pay community infrastructure levy, SIL. By law, parished wards receive 15% of the SIL money. And we took a decision, I say we as a council, I think many years ago, decided that non-parished wards would also receive 15% of whatever the SIL money is in their ward, that's generated in their ward, from, as you quite rightly say, taking the housing, okay? And the 85% goes into the main SIL fund. And the difference is that the 15% is then, it's allocated to the ward councillors for them to come up with projects that they want to spend specifically. And it's only 15%. So it's not the gigantic sums, of course, but it's worthwhile projects that the representatives of the residents in the ward, i.e. the ward councillors, can influence and direct that money to. Interesting you say that I can't see how a ward can't spend the 15%. Okay, there are years and years and years of experience of those 15% simply growing and growing and growing and not being spent. Right, so and that's not just true of borough, that's also true in parishes as well, where they've built up massive funds, right, without spending it. So I think that's the 15%. And this executive, only 2-3 executives ago, brought in a new system whereby that pool, those monies could be pooled. And forgive me, Councillor Bates and Councillor Garrett, but I use Old Dean through no fault of their own. A lot of Old Dean is covered in protected areas, and they struggle to get a lot of houses put up in Old Dean, which means that they generate very little SIL. But as a borough, we decided that we could pool some of that and do work in Old Dean or anywhere else, in fact, if there was a good case for doing it. So that's all in the 15%, okay? And parishes are excluded from that because they can't play in that pool, forgive me, that PWL, because they could by all means pull money in from other wards for projects, but it would be very difficult for them to release money into the rest of the borough. So that's why they're excluded. Now, your point about 85% is then worth certainly examining, because now the 85% is obviously the bulk of it, and that can be used anywhere across the borough by this council deciding what is the right use of that money. Now, you've made a couple of points that the money is made used. I think you said the A30 Camberley Town Centre, right? I'm going to go to Mrs. Rickard. I'm sure there are examples. You're, forgive me, Mr. Councillor Alloway, that's your Bisley West End? Yep, okay. So first thing I'm going to ask Mrs. Rickard is, and I'm on thin ice here because you should only ask a question if you know what the answer is, but I'm going to ask. Are there any examples where money from the 85% has been used in or around Bisley and West End?
The bulk of the money that we collect under the 85% is spent on SANGs. So an example of SANGs that we've bought is the Windlemere Golf Course, which is close to the new development at West End, and it serves that. And another recent acquisition is the Chobham SANGs off Station Road. And the bulk, and one of the reasons our still sort of levy is so high is because we have to fund SANGs. So actually, once you've taken SANGs costs out of what we collect, there's only about another 20% goes into the main borough fund. We now produce an annual report called the Infrastructure Funding Statement, which sets all of that out. And that went to executive just before Christmas. In terms of what's called the main SIL fund, in recent years, the borough has chosen to use that to fund highway schemes in and around Camberley. But the borough can choose to spend that money on whatever it likes, mainly in accordance with what's known as its Regulation 123 list, which it also amended at committee to, for example, to include broadband internet connections. So that kind of connectivity, not just transport schemes. So if there is a bid around West End that represents a strategic proposal around highways, you can put in a bid for the SIL main fund, but you would need to demonstrate that there was county highway support for that, because we cannot deliver that bid without county highway support. So that's something really for you, for Councillor Alloway, to take away and think about whether you could actually put together a strategic bid with support of county. And I would suggest maybe some match funding from the parish, who've received, I think, nearly £600,000 so far to undertake those works. But that's something you can do, because that's what that main fund is there for, is the really big projects. And what you're proposing at West End is actually a really big project.
Right, and let me just jump in a couple of things, Councillor Alloway, if I may. First of all, I'm assuming, Mrs. Rickard, that the points you were making are particularly relevant to item small v, where the recommendation is not to award for the highway works in West End, for the points you've just raised. Okay,
that's correct. And
I just wanted to clarify that. That's okay. The second thing is, and I'm not sure it came across exactly as it was meant there, Councillor Alloway, but it came across as in you're kind of on your own there for you to sort all this out. All right, well, with counties and all the rest of it. And that is not at all, I'm sure, what Mrs. Rickard meant. The officers are there to support all of us.
Absolutely.
Right? And that support, I'm telling you, Councillor Alloway, that the support will be there for us to, as members, to do what is right for our residents and our wards. Okay, so I'm more than happy to have a meeting with you offline, and we can go through exactly why the recommendation is to not award at this point for the crossings in West End, and work with you on how we actually get that up to a level where it can be passed, if that's okay with you.
But could I just say, the successful bids involved a huge amount of work with County Council. So we really need to get the County Council involved in this.
Sure.
And the other thing about the successful bids is that we levied in other funding, a ratio of roughly 1 to 4. So for every £1 that the borough put in, we got £4 of funding from other sources. And so that made it viable for us to actually deliver those projects. Those projects.
So there's rules and conventions and everything, but what I heard was the operative word "we" there.
Yes.
Right, and I like that. Okay, so if that's okay with you, Councillor Alloway, unless you want to come back on your point.
Yeah, always the 600,000 15% figure is dropped in as if you've got enough money. No, we've in this parish has spent that money in underprivileged, under-resourced facilities for the 10 to 18-year-olds, and we've got Amuga, we've got the skate park, and a new building is proposed for Scout and Guides. So that money is well spent on things that the parish should be involved in. What we shouldn't be paying for is highways projects. And where our money is used up on our priorities, and that was within consultation with the community, which I don't think some other things have been consulted in the same way. We're perfectly happy with how this money is being spent. But with 400 houses, 1,000 new people, crossings are needed to get across busy roads. Now, whether that's, the borough and the county, once we put these requests in, and they're supported by petitions with 232 signatures from residents, supported by borough councillors, supported by county councillors, and now a week before the executive, suddenly it's a no-goer.
Okay,
if there's not enough information there, or we're in the wrong place, then as soon as that goes in and it's not right, come back to us, and then we'll get it into the right place.
There we go. That aircraft circled for a while, but it landed. That's good. Okay. A couple of things, right? One is, I don't know if you noticed, but you actually changed hats there. You were suddenly a parish councillor for 2 minutes there, right? Okay, all right. You're absolutely right. I don't think parish should have to pay for roads, but the same argument can be made for the borough council as well, right? Our budget is what? If you look at it the most generous way you can, it's about £13 million. Okay, county have got a budget of 1.2 billion. All right, quite a big chunk of that is actually roads. So, what we're trying to do as a borough is work with the parishes, work on behalf of our residents. And unfortunately, we have to work with the people who've got a lot of money, and it's their responsibility, county, to try and make it happen. All I'm really interested in, Councillor Alloway, is how do we get what the residents of your ward want and need, right? How do we get it? And I'm prepared to work with you on doing exactly that if we can get it done. Okay, I'm going to move on now to Councillor Councillor Hawkins and then Councillor Rise.
Thank you, Leader. Can I make two very quick points before I come on to my other point? 65% of the county spend is on adult and children's social care. They spend in the order of £1.5 million per day. On sill payment, Parkside, we contributed, my fellow councillor and I, we put money towards items on the Evergreen play area, Southcote Park play area, and the Portsmouth Road Vaz signs. I really just wanted to put those markers down in that we have used our money where we can, and we've used it carefully. You will, of course, be aware that I have been supporting over 2,000 parents and guardians living in Parkside and Heatherside, plus further afield, in converting the current raised platform at Ravenscote School to a zebra crossing. Only yesterday, I received a report of a lorry careering down the Upper Chobham Road and only just managing to stop before the platform. And actually today there was a note in from a parent saying that, interestingly enough, the phased school hours have made the situation on the crossings worse rather than better, because it stretched out the hours of which the children are coming out of school. At the last local area committee, chaired by Councillor Deach, who is still here, we were given a budget figure of £50,000 to complete the works to a zebra crossing. The proposal was supported by all the councillors, for which I thank them. Now, it was our intention to use the Parkside sill money towards that. Now, under the new basis, actually, we're delighted to be able to support David Lewis on the refurbishment of the Orchard Way playground, but this is using some of the money that we had earmarked for the crossing. Now, given the importance to 2,000 plus residents, will you please confirm that you would support the additional monies coming from the pooled sill money top up the required sum once we have a firm figure from Surrey County Council Highways officers. Obviously, it has to go through the system, but it needs to be signed off by the members of the local area committee, which is the senior committee in the decision making for the platform. So I'm really looking for a firm as commitment as you're able that you will add to any required monies over and above that money that is sitting with Parkside. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. Okay, well, there's two elements to that. In terms of safety outside schools, okay, I know this is a number of issues. We've just heard from Councillor Alloway. I know that Councillor Tedder had a similar couple of issues with outside schools and crossings. So absolutely, I'm committed to doing whatever we can to support safety outside schools, crossings, okay? The second element is, you're absolutely right, you can benefit from, although you have seen a decrease in your supposed fund because you've gone down, I think, from something like 43,000 down to 28,000 because you've gone into the pool. You also, of course, can benefit from that. I think you just mentioned 50,000. You only would have had 43,000. You can actually get the extra that you need from the pooling for that to go through. So the pooling actually would work for you, and I guarantee that it would continue to work for you, though you've lost some for the pooling, because it is about push and pull, if you forgive the play on words there. All right, you will at times, your money will go down, but when you've got a good project to go through, the system will allow you to pull money in from other wards that are not using it. And what I'm glad to see is that this has brought it to the top of a lot of people's agenda. Absolutely, Councillor Hawkins, this has been at the top of your agenda for a long time. But for other wards, they're starting to really appreciate the value of that SIL money. And now I'd like to see that money spent on exactly the kind of projects you're talking about. So good. Councillor Rise and then Councillor Wheeler.
Thank you, Leader. I agree with the last comment you just made of that it's actually really important that ward members are actually finding opportunities to spend the SIL money on. My question's a relatively easy one, I hope, for Councillor Lewis, and I just want some clarity on Table 1 and Table 2 on page 22 and 23. I'm just asking, is this the 15% figure that's being, and I'm just wondering, so the remaining fund almost, is that essentially the apportioned 15% SIL funds that we have available?
Yeah, Councillor Lewis?
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, I'll hand on to Mrs. Rickard. She can probably confirm that. But as far as I believe it is.
Yes, the table 2 tells you what's left out of the 15%. So as I explained to Councillor Alloway earlier on, the main SIL fund isn't included in this. That's for strategic projects. So that's a separate process which can go to executive. And that's all reported in the infrastructure funding statement, which was reported to executive before Christmas.
Thank you, Mrs. Rickard. That's the exact answer I was hoping for. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think just, if I might just build on that, Councillor Rise, okay? I think there's perhaps a dawning, not necessarily just on the relatively new councillors, but some councillors have been here for a while, okay, of the actual value of the SIL money. When it's said the council decides on what happens with the 85%, that's us, isn't it? That's not the officers, that has to go through us. So I think the next time that comes through, I think we can expect all of us to be looking at a lot more scrutiny and what we can do and be effectively trying to make sure that as much of it is spent in the right place and hopefully not too colloquial about your own ward, mine in St. Michael's or whatever, but taking a borough view. But I think it is actually important, and it's been seen to give it that importance now, which is good. Councillor Wheeler. Sorry, you're still on mute, Councillor Wheeler.
Oh, sorry, that's a rare thing. I think what has become very apparent listening to some of the members' comments this evening is that there is, without doubt, a lot of building that is going on in the villages and the surrounding areas. which is as we all know, don't have the same level of infrastructure. And I wonder if maybe we could do anything to encourage county to look at planning and their contribution to it in the round and as a whole. I think crossings and schools in particular are something which are coming under increased scrutiny and pressure, and actually have a vastly increasing safety risk that are associated with them. So just as Councillor Hawkins is concerned about school crossings in his area, in Windlesham there is no crossing for people at all, not a single safe crossing. And in Chobham, there's not even a school sign that alerts the HGVs that thunder past it that there is a school there and should be protected. And the very narrow pavements that are associated with a rural area and also an area which is predominantly a conservation area and with listed buildings also increase the danger. So I do feel that as a borough, we need to be slightly more proactive towards our relationship with county and how we go about looking at something which truly is integrated and thought through, rather than what appears to be a very piecemeal approach to both planning, highways and safety. So how we do that, my question, I suppose, goes back to you as leader as to how you feel the best way of some form of intelligent engagement can actually take place.
Well, that's a big intelligent engagement, right? Okay, can we just have engagement? Would that be okay? No. That's not an easy thing. I could BS you with yeah, happy to take it away and look at it and all the rest of it. But to have serious engagement with county, I would suggest there's two main ways. All right, we're lucky that we actually have a number of dual hatters in our midst, right, who are county as well, and I know that they fight for this borough in their seats, okay, and I will impress upon them even more so. Right. The other thing is that, and again, maybe Mrs. Rickard could help me out and Mr. Roberts, but in terms of maybe particular Mr. Roberts, you've come from other borough councils, right? Have you got experience of ways into exactly the kind of influence that Councillor Wheeler is talking about, particularly to do with roads, highways?
Thank you, Leader. I think you've certainly identified one of them. The other route is the local committee in terms of influencing their spend, although they do usually get an allocation determined centrally from Surrey. And I think as ward councillors, in terms of your communication with Surrey County Council about the relative priority of this sort of spend. I know that in my discussions with Surrey Highways, they are very keen to maximise the contribution that boroughs and districts make from our SIL money. And we, in turn, are very keen to maximise the contribution that they make from their own funds. And that's a debate that has been going on for quite some time. So perhaps the best answer, Leader, is that I think it's everybody. I think ward councillors, dual-hatted councillors, potentially yourself as leader and myself as chief executive, all making sure that we use every opportunity to bring these things to Surrey Highways' attention.
No, thank you. One of the things I would say, I'm involved with a resident group who are trying to get a pedestrian crossing outside of a school. Okay, they haven't asked me to bring it up here, so I'm not going to say who it is. But one of the major stumbling blocks of that is that county have had a look at the school, they've had a look at the road, and they've come back and said formally that they do not feel that a crossing is required outside that school. Right, and it's counterintuitive because you've got hundreds, if not thousands, of parents saying this is a death trap and we need some kind of pedestrian crossing, and yet the highways, who are expert, and they're not bad people and they don't have hidden agendas and all the rest of it, but they're, in their professional opinion, it doesn't require it. When you've got that kind of obstacle, it's then difficult to try and fight your way past that. And I can't tell you honestly why because I don't have the report, but I don't know why they don't feel that it's right that there's a pedestrian crossing outside that school. You would feel that every school in the country would have a pedestrian crossing outside it, wouldn't you, for safety? But they haven't. So I'd have to go with Mr. Roberts' answer there, Councillor Wheeler, that it's a case of it's a slow grind rather than there's some kind of password to get in. Councillor Bates, I think I'm in order. Councillor Bates and Councillor Garrett and Councillor Rise.
Thank you, Leader. And I guess one way that we could actually impact change is that there's a very good opportunity in a couple of months' time to address the leadership of Surrey County Council, and that'll be a matter for residents to decide for themselves. In terms of the...
I don't really see that happening, though, Councillor Bates.
We shall obviously wait and see. In terms of the 3 areas that I did want to talk about in regard to this paper, the first is regarding the fact that this paper around pooling is long overdue. I think I raised it 5 times over the years, and I'm pleased to see that we are now at the stage of moving forward on projects. And I do agree that most of this money should be used in the locality. Ward boundary was always an artificial boundary. So to actually look at this in the locality, as others have raised, is good. But there is always, and there has always been, a need to look at other areas that, for good reason, as you've already mentioned, is we're not able to have seal themselves. I mean, in Old Dean, we haven't been able to actually have any monies because we can't have housing for reasons you've explained. It's not because we don't want to. In fact, we do want to. We do want to see more social housing, but we haven't been able to get any of it. But I am pleased to see that the award for the CCTV in the Old Dean Recreation Ground, I think that is very welcome, something I'm pleased to support. And the other comment I did want to make, and I know this is unusual to talk about a project in someone else's ward, so but I do have history with it, is I'm delighted to see about the Orchard Way Playground refurbishment. I used to play in that area myself, and I suspect I probably played on the equipment when it probably was first there. And I'm not going to name the individuals, but I do know the people who helped to run the resident campaign. I attended the Carol event that is referred to in this document and other community events, and I think they've done a good job on this. I know that it's been signed off by the councillors, but with great respect, it was the community representatives that led the way on that. I haven't been given permission to name them, so I won't, but I know who they are. And I'm really pleased that this will go forward. And what I would say is it doesn't just impact on Watch It's, because a lot of the children who use that will be children coming from what I remember as my old school of Bristow and walking back home to St Michael's, because that is not quite on the route, but it's near enough where children can burn off some energy. So this is a much needed player. I'm delighted to see that this very, very long overdue playground will get refurbished. And so I'm pleased to see that. And I want to formally recognise the role of the residents in that.
Good. Thank you very much. That's duly noted. Thank you. Councillor Garrett.
Yes, just a small point really. Reference the outside schools. Literally today, we've had an issue outside one of the schools where I'm chair of governors, and it's all kicked off on social media as we expect. My concern is that to try and put a school crossing in, or a solution to that, is like looking at the conversations today, looks like it's nigh on impossible, which concerns me greatly. There is wardens, which I know can police the area, but there are only a few of them, and we use the ones from Woking. So we can't even get the officers up to check to stop people parking because there's not enough of them. Again, I know this is counting, but it's a whole pile of different issues. And unfortunately, and I really don't like the fact I'm saying this, but it has been proven that the only time something happens is when there is a serious accident. And unfortunately, no matter what anybody like, whether people like it or not, that is the truth of the matter. And until somebody has a serious accident, no one does anything, unfortunately. And I know it's not all borough problem, but I know that something has to be done somewhere. That's just a personal feeling on this. And I'm concerned that I'm having conversations with parents now saying, can we do something? And I'm looking at what we've just discussed here, and I'm concerned that we're not going to come up with a solution. And I'm not expecting you to come up with a solution straight away, Leader.
And I'm glad you're not asking me for a solution, but I certainly appreciate your point of view, Councillor Garrett. Okay, but I have to say I understand the sentiment, but the county council would take real umbrage at the statement that nothing's going to change until a tragedy happens. I'm guessing they would point out to the 10,000 things they did last year to improve road safety that were not triggered by a tragedy, right? I absolutely sympathise with the sentiment, but you know, it's too sweeping a statement for me that nothing will happen unless it's a tragedy, because they're spending millions and millions and millions of pounds on road safety, right? We happen to disagree with them that what they're currently doing, we don't disagree with. What we want is extra, and that's where the problem is. But I do sympathise with the sentiment. So, Councillor Rise, and maybe I owe Councillor Alloway an apology. Apparently, you were waving, and I'm going by electronic hands up, which is much easier. So, thank you, Councillor Rise, and then Councillor Alloway.
Thank you, Leader. I also wanted to just associate myself with Councillor Bates's comments regarding the Orchard Way Park upgrade. I know the group of campaigners there very well as well, and the amount of work and the tireless campaigning they've been put in. I'm really glad to see that they've made progress. What the one question I do have though is just regarding, and I do apologise to Councillor Bates and Garrett for stepping onto their ward almost slightly. I just wanted to ask a question about the CCTV, and if the CCTV gets vandalised, what is the plan for their replacement? Because obviously it can be costly to install, so I'm just wondering what is in place if they get damaged and they then need to be replaced.
Sure. Okay. I could go to the portfolio holder, but Mrs. Rickard has put her hand up. Councillor Jennings-Evans, are you okay with me going to Mrs. Rickard?
Yes, or I'm sure Daniel will be able to answer as well.
Or of course Daniel. Yeah. Okay, Mrs. Rickard, you were waving there.
I can't see Daniel on my screen. I have actually discussed this question with Daniel. The maintenance costs are about £1,000 a year. So we can pick up any damage through that. That's not a huge sum of money. So we can pick that revenue cost up within the budgets. It was the initial capital cost of installation that we couldn't pick up within existing budgets.
Yeah, Councillor Rise, I think the shorter answer to your question is if £7,000 worth of cameras gets destroyed through vandalism, what's the plan? Right?
Yes.
Well, no, all I'm going to do is just clarify your question. I'm not going to give you an answer. Okay.
It's essentially because if they get nicked or they get destroyed,
You know what? The answer would be that there would have to be another proposal to put another £7,000 worth of cameras up.
I was just wondering if there was insurance on them or the like.
There is insurance. All of our equipment is insured, right? But it's a blanket insurance. It's not item by item. But yes, there is that. But we would have to review the thing and go again. People often ask for, can we have vandal-proof X? You know, swings, roundabouts, CCTV. No, you can't. There's no such thing as vandal-proof. There's anti-vandal, but there's no vandal-proof. So, yeah, we'd have to go round the loop again and see whether we'd produced the right, procured the right equipment, etc. But we've made a commitment to have CCTV cover that park, and I'd like to see us carry that through if we can. So, Councillor Alloway?
Yeah, just to add that there's quite a few residents that don't understand how highways works, and what they see is little used cul-de-sacs getting resurfaced while main strategic roads through the villages are left to rot. So in an attempt to try and get under the bonnet and actually get on the local area committee to find out how things do work, I can confirm actually that highways have got some sort of Barnett formula spreadsheet which rates things according to safety, benefit, blah, blah, blah. And that's how they come to rank their schemes. But you're right. Essentially, someone has to have a serious injury or die before it'll go up the list and get justified to come to fruition. And I think it's strange the way they operate, especially when you see them put things in and you ask, well, why have you done that? And they said, well, because of the history of the road. So you look up the crash plans and there hasn't been an accident there. So Yeah, and you can't get straight answer out of them. Well, why have you done it?
No, I appreciate the comments, Councillor Holloway. Okay, if there's no more discussion on that, okay, I'm going to do two things. I'm going to put it to the members of the executive. There's a recommendation that we resolve small item 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And again, for clarity, and because Councillor Holloway is here, item 5 is that at this point, no funding is awarded for the highway works in West End. I just want to make that clear. Okay, so the members of the executive, are we agreed with the recommendation? Okay, thank you. All right. Okay, the second thing I'm going to do is we've been at an hour and 10 minutes. So I'm just going to have a 5-minute break. All right, we'll be back at 7:15. And then we'll start on the next item because we're about halfway through the agenda. So if we do another one, we're going to be another 30-40 minutes. So, okay, 7:15 back here prompt. Thank you. Thank you. Right. Well, I make it 7:15, so in theory we could start, but I think there's only the 4 of it. Oh, here we go. Right. Okay, good. Thanks so much, everybody, for being back so promptly. Okay, we are on to item 7, Climate Change Strategy and Action Plan. If I can ask Councillor Mansfield to introduce the paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm delighted to bring this paper forward. As I'm sure as everyone's aware, the pandemic has really hit the headlines over the last year or so. Prior to that, one of the biggest things on the agenda was the climate change that we're all going through. But we've in fact even witnessed on a local basis with the fires and things on the heathlands that surround our superb borough. This basically is the Climate Change Strategy and Action Plan, and it's following the declaration of the climate emergency in 2019. I'm not going to go through the entire paper. I'm sure all the members have looked through between pages between 33 and 140, but I would just like to say and put on record my indeed thanks to Kieran Bartlett, the officer, for all his superb work in putting this paper together, and also the assistance of the head of regulation, Jenny Rickard, who has also assisted in putting this together. This has been a cross-party group putting this together. Basically, the details therein, there's a number of details as regards our action plan and how we're going to work with the county. It's a very thorough, it's an incredibly interesting document. It's been a fantastic opportunity to work with the team. And I think that also the climate change group that's been set up, which is a cross-party group, I think everyone should be extremely proud of the work that they've done and all the input they've actually put into this. It covers a number of areas that's going forward, and this will be a changing and evolving programme, but it goes to show what our commitment is going to be as regards the facing the next emergency that's around the corner once we've got the pandemic out of the way, and that is the climate change emergency. So basically the recommendation is that the executive is advised to resolve that the climate change action plan as set out at Annex A to this report be agreed, and Surrey's climate change strategy is endorsed. We have on the call this evening, we have Kieran Bartlett, so I welcome Kieran to this tonight, and also we have Jenny Rickard to help in answering any questions that you may have. But I also say, I would reiterate, it's been a fantastic cross-party group putting this together, and it really shows how we can work together in achieving, these goals and these ambitions for the benefit of all our residents that live within our borough. So without any further ado, questions, please.
Yeah, I'm happy to open it up to questions, but just before I come to Councillor Rise, I just want to say that I think this is one of the best reports that I've seen in 6 years as a councillor. Right? It is comprehensive, it's balanced, it's actionable, which I really like. I just think it's superb, and I think it's obviously a working group that's well chaired. Congratulations to the chairman. I know he's here. Congratulations to the people on that group, and congratulations to the officers. I cannot say enough. I mean, I think I've said it before, but it's worth saying again. Environmental issues are really, really near and dear to my heart. It's something that we should be tackling. And the smile on my face just got bigger and bigger as I read the report. I think it's absolutely superb. And having said that, over to a certain Councillor Rise.
Thank you, Leader. I just thank you, Councillor Mansford, for your support, and to the rest of the executive as well. As chair of the working group, it's been a real pleasure to lead this group. And as Leader and Councillor Mansford have said, it really has been a truly cross-party working group. And I do actually feel when we first came together, I kind of wanted to make sure that anything that we presented was actionable, rather than just having a broad set of aims. I actually wanted, and the rest of the group wanted, to have clear steps forward, and that's kind of what we have come forward to. Obviously, I'm not going to go through it. It will take forever. I just wanted to say thank you for everyone. And obviously, I really want to thank Kieran Bartlett, as it already has, Jane Reeves and Jenny Rickard, and Tim Passion as well. The officer support for this has been incredible, and the amount of work they've put in has been incredible as well. So I recommend, alongside the officer recommendation, that this is approved as well. Thank you.
I think it would have been a big surprise if you hadn't. Okay, Councillor Tapper, and then I saw Councillor Bates's hand go up. So,
thank you, Leader. Yes, I'd like also to fully endorse this strategy and action plan. I read through it, and I believe that it covers all of the pertinent issues and provides suggestions as to solutions which I believe will be effective if they come to fruition, particularly in terms of what the council can do with its own property, with its own people, and with its own way of working. But I would like to remind everybody here this evening that it should not stop there. We should ask ourselves what we personally can do to help solve the climate change situation. We may only be able to contribute a little bit ourselves, like putting solar panels on the roof of a house if we don't have it already. But we can do that. And if we all did that, in fact, if the whole country did, it will go a long way to solving certainly our renewable energy problem.
Yeah,
and I'm sure you can think of other things as well. So please endorse this action plan, but please look to yourselves and say, what can I personally do to help as well?
Thank you. I saw, I've got Councillor Bates and Councillor Perry and Councillor Gallagher, but I saw Councillor Mansfield's hand just go up. I think he wanted just to reply to Councillor Tapper. Go ahead.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Councillor Tapper, please be assured that this is a journey we're going down now. First of all, it was to recognise the importance and putting a strategy together, which I fully agree with you, and your thanks to all the people who have worked on this. But this is a journey. If you actually look, and I'm sure you have, but look at the detail of some of the paper with regards to the county. We do focus a great deal on what we can do as households, what we can all do as individuals going forward. It is there. And interestingly enough, I didn't point it out earlier, but when you raised the issue about the Blackwater Valley and about the emissions, etc., there is a part of that within this paper, within this group. So please, and if you need any clarification, please let me know. We can discuss this. But it does, from a strategic point of view, say as a household how residents, families, children, schools can all get involved going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. I have to say, Councillor Mansfield, Councillor Tapper, one of my big concerns was that we were only going to pay this lip service. You know, it was just going to be about headlines and, you know, we've declared a climate emergency and that's good, we can move on. I was so pleased that the report is the way it is, because it means that we're not paying it lip service. We're actually going to really tackle our bit. So Councillor Bates next. Thank you.
Thank you. And I've really been pleased to be a member of this working group. I think this is a working group where it has made a difference. It's going to make a difference into the lives of our residents. I'm very happy to give praise where it's due. I think Councillor Rice's chairing of the group has been very good indeed, and we've got the report that's going forward, which I'm wholeheartedly encourage you to support. This does present now a challenge to the executive going forward, because the working group members have now done our bit, and we've come up with what I think we all agree is a very good strategy and action plan, but we can't enact it. That can only be done by the executive. Now, so I guess it's the challenge going forward to the executive for now and the executive for future is to make sure that this area is properly resourced, to make sure that it's properly monitored. We will obviously play our part in doing that as well, but to make sure that these critically important issues don't just get left in a document on a dusty shelf, but are actually enacted in order to protect the lives of our residents.
Well, I can thank you, Councillor Bates. I can feel Mr. Roberts wanting to come in, but I'm not going to. All right, I will just relay a conversation that he and I had, which was, and it was Mr. Roberts who initiated the conversation. Without putting words in your mouth, Mr. Roberts, I know you were expressed positively about the report, and the first question that it was on Mr. Roberts' mind was, okay, how do we monitor this and make sure that we're accountable for delivering it? Right. So you're absolutely right. The officers and the executive, and I'd go as far as to say the entire council has to take this on board and make sure that we're doing this, that we're actually doing it and not just talking about it. So I think it's a point well made, but it's certainly taken on board. Councillor Galliford, I wondered if we'd hear from you, leader of the Green Party.
Hopefully not too weird a question this time.
Have you got any weird questions you want to ask?
Well, as a Green, you would expect me to comment on this, of course. I agree it is a very comprehensive strategy and everyone has worked very hard to put this together. My question really is, what progress has been made on obtaining funds and engaging a climate officer within the council? Because this person is going to be an absolutely crucial to the enactment of all of these policies that we're hoping to roll out.
Yeah, it starts with just for clarification. County have provided some funding, I believe, Mr. Roberts, for an environmental expert officer to join the borough. We are recruiting that individual. I can ask for an update, but I think we're in the early stages of actually recruiting. The thing, we've got a job spec and we're looking at going out. Okay. It's actually not easy because, and it's kind of a double-edged sword here, Councillor Galliford. The more that people like us take it seriously, the more that we all identify that we need to bring on expertise and bodies to start carrying out the actions, which means that there's now a severe shortage of people in that thing. No, it's exactly what it should be, isn't it? It's a growing industry, and hopefully more and more people will get into it. But it's not going to be an easy post to fill, but it's certainly a priority of this executive to get it done as quickly as possible. So I don't want to be sitting here 6 months from now saying we haven't done anything because we haven't been able to recruit somebody. So, okay, Councillor Perry and then Councillor Rise.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a comment. I agree with everybody else. This is a super report. I've been very happy to sit on that committee, but I'm just particularly happy now to see that the subject of recycling and waste disposal has been linked with the other actions that were originally proposed. It makes a lot of sense.
I wonder why.
All of those sectors.
I wonder why.
Wonder why. That's right. Anyway, it's good to see it in there. Well done.
It's an excellent report. Councillor Rise.
Thank you, Leader. I just want to come back on the issue of monitoring progress, and it is my intention. I know it was brought up at the last meeting of the working group that now that the action plan has been put together, almost the working group's remit almost kind of evolves into a monitoring group of sorts. So it's the working group itself will be kind of monitoring the progress of the action plan and how we continue to work in conjunction with the executive to deliver these as well.
Yeah, I'd also like to see that working group have a lot to do with the steering of certain actions as well. You know, I think I wouldn't want to just see that group wasted as a, you know, every quarter you get a report from an officer saying we've done this, we haven't done that. I'd also like it to be that the officers bring that to you and say, you know, because there's going to be decisions, isn't there? There's going to be about prioritizing. There's going to be about how exactly do we tackle something. And I'd like to see that working group continue to be that driving force in that. The more councillors we've got involved with this, the more effective it's going to be. So, okay. Everybody has been effusive in its praise of the report, and I'm kind of in two minds whether to suggest this, but I have an addition to the report that I'd like to float to the executive, and in this case, Councillor Rise, I'm going to kind of second you, right? Because I'd value your opinion as well. There's one I think important, but I can't really find it, and I'd be happy if it was pointed out. But there's one kind of just action that I think we could take, which doesn't seem to get mentioned. So I'd like to just float it as it would be. I think in the report it might take the place B16. All right. Don't be looking at the report because there isn't a B16. It stops at B15, right? Okay. It's along the lines. Well, let me read it, and then I'd float it to the executive. But I particularly want to hear from Councillor Mansfield and Councillor Rise. Okay. Right. And again, if I'm wrong and I've missed the report, by all means tell me. But it's this. Okay. In B16, this council divests of and refrains from investing in carbon-intensive industries or companies and encourages others within the borough to do the same. Right? Okay, so now we don't have gigantic investments in PLCs or shares or whatever like that. We are in a pension scheme, and the pension scheme is administered by the county. Okay, but one of the things I would just like to add, now it doesn't have to be added by the executive this evening. I'm happy for that suggestion to go back through the process with the working group. Okay, but it struck me when I was reading the report that this might add just another little bit to the effectiveness of the council, not the report, but the council. Okay, again, I'm floating it as a suggestion. I'm very happy to hear people's opinions. Okay, Councillor Mansfield, then Councillor Rise, then Councillor Wheeler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Whilst I think that it is something that we could take forward for discussion within the group, I think before we actually put it as a formal addition, because obviously the involvement with the county council, and as you refer to with the pension funds, obviously we would have to look at that because there may be some form of conflict, because there is a pulling out of fossil fuel investments and having shares in those companies with county, and has been a reduction over the last 3 years and is continuing. I just feel that we would have to look at that as a note before we actually put anything formally in. I do in principle, I do agree with the statement, but it's just looking at it in more detail.
I know that you might regard our investments as the pension scheme, but it is administered by the council, and it would mean that we'd have to look at that. That's fine. Councillor Rise.
Thank you, Leader. The group had discussed this. That was when we first started, was one of the issues that we did broach, and that was one of the issues I raised, especially regarding pensions. And obviously, as we're aware, that's covered by county. Again, I have no opposition to that being included. And I think that's a sensible line to put in. I think under energy, which is page 6 and page 7, it doesn't say it in as many words, but it does kind of.
I saw there were a couple that you could read that way. Yeah.
Yes. So if if the executive is minded to be more specific in its language, I'm more than happy for we have a working group meeting coming up at the end of this month. I'm more than happy if we can try and add it onto the agenda to be discussed then. But I have no opposition to it. And I would have to discuss, and I'll be more than willing to engage with officers and council in Manfield how.
I guess I am by definition advocating for it, but I'm genuinely just putting it forward as trying to be a constructive suggestion, right? The two parts of it are that we try and divest or don't invest in, but obviously it's also encourage others in the borough not to invest in carbon intensive industries, right? Because that is actually creating a lot of change within the carbon intensive industries. You know, they're looking at that. So Councillor Wheeler.
Thank you, Leader. I didn't have a question. I was actually applauding your amendment.
Oh, sorry, I thought you, right. So it was a clap, not a hand up, right? Okay.
If I could just come back, Leader, it's in, I'm sure on B8,
right?
And again, this is not me trying to say no. And in B8, it does say working in partnership with local businesses and organisations to deliver carbon reductions throughout the borough. Again, it's not as if you want more, if it's the specific language, I'm more than happy for us to consider that, and I would support that.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Alloway and then Councillor Hawkins. Edward Hawkins.
Yes, thank you, Leader. Yeah, I just wondered if you include that amendment, is there any impact calculation on what it will mean for British companies, British jobs in the energy sector? A third airport runway at Heathrow, is all that going to be wiped away?
Yeah, I can't say to you hand on heart that I've done any work to see what that would do in terms of that. Okay, and to be honest, if you said to me, if we withdrew our X million pound from a certain company, they'd be severely damaged by it, I would by intuition want to scale that down over a period of time, right? Because it is about balance. But for me, it just seemed a very small but important element that was missing. But as Councillor Rise has pointed out, it is kind of covered in 2 or 3 other points. And it's not about being pedantic about it should be mentioned. It's, the wording. It's just I wanted the action, and I'm more than happy that it goes back to the working group as a suggestion. If they came back and said no for whatever reason, I would accept the decision of the working group. But Councillor Hawkins, Edward.
Thank you, Leader. I mean, really just picking up the points from Councillor Alloway and Councillor Rice, almost beware of the law of unintended consequences. Because in fact, one of the, I believe, I'm not certain, one of the largest petrochemical companies is also one of the largest companies investigating alternative fuels. And so if you pulled out of that petrochemical company, are you damaging the prospects of improved natural fuels? So, and Councillor Mansfield is absolutely right. There is a policy, as I believe, he'd be better placed than I, at county on disinvesting on certain companies, but it is taking a bit of time. I'd also add that a lot of people who are retired in this area may have their pension funds in part supported by companies that are petrochemical or if other industries. So, you could be impacting on the pension income of some of our residents. So I just flag up the law of unintended consequences. Absolutely right to be looked at. But
those are some of the arguments against. Yeah, and those are some of the arguments against, and I get that. Okay, you forgive me if it is about balance, but somebody needs to be arguing the other side. Okay, and I think that's we have an opportunity as leaders in our communities to kind of look at these things. Okay, it's not intended to be controversial. I'm not trying to put it in order to stir up a hornet's nest or anything, right? It's I've read up a lot on the environment. I'm not by any means. Councillor Galliford and I have had an hour or so of talking about things, and I'm not saying I've been educated, right? But It's something that I think was just a small improvement or addition to, not to the report, but to what the council can achieve. But to be honest, from what I've heard from Councillor Mansfield, Councillor Rise, I'm more than happy for the working group to take it as an item that's suggested, have the discussion, and again, I assure you, I'm happy to go with whatever the outcome of the cross-party working group is. Okay, but I'm glad we actually had the discussion. All right, one of the things that Councillor Gallagher did point out to me was that it only takes 3% of the population to actually make a change. You'd think I would think it would be something like 51%, but in actual fact, you get a very small number of people can create a revolution, right? And that's why it's important that we do what we say we're going to do. Okay, so the recommendation, as per Councillor Mansfield's statement, is there in front of you. Members of the executive were advised to resolve that the climate change action plan is set out in Appendix A to this report is agreed, and Surrey climate change strategy be endorsed. Are we in agreement? Okay. All right. Now, Councillor Rise, I just I said I would second you for the discussion. Is that a thumbs up? Okay.
Well, I don't have a vote on the executive.
Yeah, I know, but I was just letting you come in there. But thanks.
I'm not sure what my group leader would think.
Right. Okay. I'm sure he'd be fine with it. Right? Okay, that's fine. That's passed. Right. On to our next item. Okay. Scheme of delegation of function to officers with granting and renewing of leases. Okay, this is mine. The governance working group met, and this is another clarification, tidying up exercise, again brought to our attention by the monitoring officer. We are a fairly substantial property holding organization now, and as you can understand, there is a lot where the lesser decisions, the smaller decisions about leases and renewals that should be automatic in the private sector, if the landlord is the council, then it can take an inordinate amount of time. And that is damaging to business, particularly in this time right now. Okay, so the governance working group had a discussion, and it is making a recommendation that the scheme of delegation is changed as per what is in the recommendation there, A, B, C, and D. All of this is aimed at allowing the officers, the monitoring officer and the legal team, to be able to make decisions which are time sensitive, but are important to our tenants as leaseholders, but are of sufficient level that we can delegate that authority to them. Everything there, anything disposal above 25,000, renewal in excess of 2 years, grant of leases for development or refurbishment, or anything that the head of legal refers to the executive as appropriate. Anything even resembling major comes back to the executive, but the recommendation is that we resolve the scheme of delegation as per the items A, B, C, and D. I'm happy to answer any questions. Okay, I'm not seeing, again, we're on 2 screens, so shout in case you're not on my screen, but I'm not seeing any questions, which is fine. So I'll put it to the members of the executive. Are we agreed with the recommendations to resolve as per A, B, C, and D of the paper? Okay, thank you. That's carried. Thank you. Okay. Item 9, write-off of irrecoverable bad debts. Councillor Lewis, this is your paper.
Thank you. Well, this paper is asking the executive to write off unrecoverable bad debts of over £1,500. Annex A is a schedule of bad debts for council tax and business rates. All reasonable attempts have been made to recover the debts, which amount to £88,057.46 for council tax and £221,343 £6,000.29 for business rates. Council tax figure represents 0.1% of our total collectible debt, and the business rate figure represents 0.09% of the total collectible debt. Can I remind members that the list of debtors in Annex A is restricted, so if anyone has any questions, either I could answer a written question or we'd have to move it into part 2 of the meeting tonight. And the other thing I'd like to clarify is this is wiping the debt from the accounts. The actual debt will still stay on the system, and should we ever meet up again with the debtors, then we will take measures to try and recover the debt. Our options for this are to write them off from the accounts or to leave them in place. Thank you.
Okay, just to reiterate what Councillor Lewis said, the list of actual debts in the annex, I would request that no one names anybody who's currently there, because that, if you want to discuss anything individual, we'd have to do that in part 2. So, okay, so the electronic hands are up. Councillor Bates and Councillor McGrady, and then Councillor Alloway.
Thank you. Yes, I'm not going to raise any individual mention of names. My question is actually going back to the whole issue of bailiffs, which is a subject which I have raised in the past. And I think it is time this year that we actually have a report that comes back to the executive, and perhaps is part of your work programme, to decide whether or not we should use bailiffs for personal debt. This is something which has been raised not only by myself, but I know Councillor White has raised it as well in the past. We haven't taken a decision on this, although if you note on paragraph 1.6, we didn't take our normal recovery action this year because of some of the pandemic. And obviously that's meant a cleansing exercise as well. So a number of enforcement actions that we would take were not possible. And I think that gives us an opportunity to review whether or not we should now be using debts for personal individual debt. I think many of us are very concerned about that as a process. We also now have an enhanced hardship fund. So the issues of the particular hardship that would be experienced should be much less. And I just think rather than bringing forward, I know I can bring a motion to council, but I'm not in favour of bringing unnecessary motions to council. I'd much rather see if there's a positive way of moving this forward. And therefore, can I have a reassurance that over the next few months, there will be a report to the executive or to the scrutiny committee asking for a report considering the future use of bailiffs, please?
I think the thrust of your question or request there is that we stop using them. Now, to be clear, we're not talking about with businesses. You're talking about council tax or another debt that is owned by an individual or a household, yeah?
Correct. So I'm suggesting that we review that. We did review that.
We decide to unilaterally not use bailiffs anymore.
I'm suggesting
Or are you saying that we tighten up on the use of bailiffs?
I'm suggesting that we look at what at least one council has already done and stop using them for that purpose. But I think rather than asking you to vote on that, I'm asking for a report on it.
Okay. All right. And again, just to be clear, Councillor Bates, a report on how often we use it. I'm trying to get the context of what the report.
So I'm asking for a report on whether we should, as a council, continue to use bailiffs for personal debt such as council tax, because my concern is that the impact that it would have on those households, and there's the balance here between what I describe as people who cannot pay, which I think we want to try and ensure that they don't get visited, and people who refuse to pay but are more than capable. And there are fewer in that category, actually. I know people who are visited and have no money. I've got one who lives very near me, who I've just been dealing with in a charitable capacity. Not a council debt, I have to say, that was a debt from another matter. But nonetheless, I think it's a subject which has been bouncing around this council now for some months and some years. And I think we need to have a proper discussion on it. And we haven't had it. And I think it's time we now had it.
Okay. I could have sworn there was 3, but I'm only seeing Councillor Alloway's hand up now. So, sorry, and then Councillor Mulvaginam. Oh, sorry, no, it was Councillor McGrath, wasn't it? Sorry, Councillor Alloway. It was Councillor McGrath. You took your hand down.
Yeah, it's
Councillor
fine.
McGrath.
It's just that Councillor Lewis actually answered my question
Oh,
as
he
his
did.
answer, as he was saying
Okay.
at the end of his announcement.
Okay.
Sorry. Thank you.
No, that's fine then. Okay, so Councillor Alloway.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. A question that might be easily answered. How is it that a debtor can go year on year accruing debt? And secondly, if at the end of 1 year there is a debt there that's not being paid, isn't that the time to engage with support or bailiffs instead of letting it accrue year on year?
Given the point that Councillor Bates has just made, are you talking about more about business rates?
Specifically business rates, because 221,000.
Okay, sorry, yeah, you can mention the sums, but please don't mention the actual company. Go ahead.
No. Yeah, because 221,000 by a lot of crossings. And I just don't see whether it's business or personal debts. If it's personal debts, support goes in for the people who are having trouble, or if they just refuse to pay, then bailiffs. I mean, one way or another, we shouldn't be allowing debts like this to keep accruing year after year after year, I'd say.
I think certainly my experience in the private sector is that if somebody's not paying, they go on, what's very perfectly called stop, right? And we don't supply any more goods to them. You can imagine that is a very different scenario when the company is in a building and it's occupying that, it's employing what could be dozens or hundreds of employees. And the idea is that you're going to do that. But I know there's a lot of action taken, particularly with companies. I'd be happy for either Councillor Lewis or Mr. Hone to just do a very brief, because it's already getting on for 8 o'clock, right? So a very brief run through for Councillor Alloway and the rest of us as to how you would escalate.
Yeah, I think I'll hand this one on to Mr. Hone, because he's now got revs and bends under his.
Yes, well, thank you, Councillor Lewis. And just very, very quickly, I mean, I think the point that's being raised is these debts are tax. These are the business rates that we raise, and if a business hasn't cleared their business rates by the end of the year, that simply accrues on to the following year, and so it does escalate while we take recovery action. Now, if you look at that schedule, and obviously without naming any names, you'll see that what we will continue to pursue those debts until these companies go into liquidation or go to CVA. So we continue to chase, but and obviously we'll make arrangements to allow people to clear their arrears, and most of our businesses do. Our collection rate is very, very high indeed, but there are just one or two that they just won't pay, and we have to continue to pursue them through all means necessary. But ultimately, if they go into liquidation or into CVA, we're not able to pursue the debt further, and those are the only debts that we bring to executive for write-off. Everything else we continue to pursue.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now to go back then to Councillor Bates's point. Sorry, yeah, okay, so Councillor Mulvaginam.
Thank you, Leader. I mean, this keeps coming up. I've been in the council only for 1.5 years, possibly 2 years. Time is has flown, having fun. This seems to be coming up every so often, I presume every 6 months, and it is disappointing, I must admit. And I agree with Councillor Bates on the bailiff. We must have a detailed discussion on this. We just cannot. We can't be crude, particularly given the circumstances of coming year. It's going to be very difficult for lots of people. We, as a council, have to seriously have a long conversation. Maybe it should be at the full council, or I don't mind at the PNF or whatever the committee. We genuinely have to have a conversation. Councillor Alloway brought a point up, which is one of the other points I want to make. Is this on the personal debts in particular? Some of these have been going. Some people have not been paying. I mean, we have a hardship allowance I know hardship allowances cannot be used in certain circumstances to pay off the rates, but we must find a way to get these people off this listing. Otherwise, what happens is their credit rating goes down, which means they cannot sustain themselves. So it's again a discussion I would like to have at the full council or with the exec or the committee or whatever it may be, because credit is important given the circumstances now. So it is something we as a council need to look at it on the whole rather than sort of look at a few numbers. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I definitely get the argument about the bailiff showing up at somebody's door and how traumatic that is. All right. I guess my concern is for the other side, which is a duty to the rest of the residents to make sure that everybody who can pay does pay. All right. Mr. Hone, we've got, I'm trying to go back to Councillor Bates's point. We kind of went, I wanted to get round everybody, but coming back to that point, do you happen to know how many times bailiffs have been used in non-business, so domestic situations? Is it something where we use them a lot or not?
It's part through Chairman Leader. It's part of our normal recovery. I haven't got the numbers that we've been using, but certainly as a last resort, we will use bailiffs for the collection of council tax if there's no other means available to us.
Okay, and Mr. Payne.
Sorry, Chairman. I was just going to say I know Robert Fox is on the call this evening, so has probably got a lot of the detail that you may ask in respect to the number of cases that have been referred to the bailiff, but it's just to re-emphasise the point, and if you're able to invite Robert, I'm sure he would like to update on position from his point of view. But you know, the bailiffs are used as a very, very last resort, and I think he will go into a lot of detail about the explanation of the other methods we have to use in terms of trying to engage with people that haven't been able to pay their council tax before we resort to using bailiffs. And perhaps the point that's been raised with regard to some of the age of some of the debts, which is quite right, members are quite right, does come up regularly. An explanation as to why, because a lot of these debts have been sort of live debts in terms of we are continuing to pursue and recover the money at very small amounts, maybe through court order or deductions from people's benefit or indeed their attachment to their earnings. But there comes a point where that gets exhausted. And that's why you do have very few and exceptional cases, because I think the report very, very clearly sets out in terms of the collection rates. We are talking here about a very few debts in terms of write-off, and there is a process for ensuring that we don't just leave them outstanding. We are actively pursuing debts even though they are old.
Okay, thank you. I will ask Mr. Fox, but I'm not looking for a breakdown. I think we all accept, probably Councillor Bates as well, that we use it as a last resort. The question is, should it be a last resort? So I will ask Mr. Fox that. But before we do, without being melodramatic, I'm just hoping that we don't have a health and safety issue here with Councillor Barnett. He's kind of slumped over and hasn't moved for a while. And I'm just becoming more and more concerned that something's happened. All right.
Might I suggest that somebody gives him a call? Maybe Sharon?
Yeah.
Sharon's actually on a finance meeting for parish.
Okay. Does anybody have Councillor Barnett's mobile number or home number?
Sometimes he just goes to sleep and then sort of wakes up again. I think it's to do with his sugar and that. Yeah.
He could be sleeping, could he?
Yeah, because sometimes I think it's his sugar level. I think it. Yeah.
I have messaged Councillor Gallagher to ask her to call him.
Right. Okay. Okay. I'm just, we take this seriously, but we've never actually lost a councillor. Right. And he's right in the middle of my screen, and I'm just, the more he sits there not moving, the more I'm getting anxious.
We're coming up to another hour. Maybe we should take a break.
Yeah. Well, I think we're almost there, but I'm gonna. Yeah, okay. Mr. Fox, are you on the call? Robert, there you are.
Yeah.
Okay, can you, I don't want you to go through the list of, the method that we use. Do you happen to know, thank you, Councillor Rice, do you happen to know off the top of your head how many times we've called in bailiffs, how many times we've used them? In a domestic situation, not a non-business situation.
Right, in respect of the current year, I don't have the number of bailiff calls, but we've collected we've collected about £74 million, of which £125,000 was collected via bailiffs.
Right.
So I can't give you the number of visits that involves, but that's the amount of cash that was this year from bailiffs.
Right, so we got to the very end. We got to the last resort.
Yep.
And the bailiffs obviously sometimes come up with nothing, but you've got the knowledge that they come up at this point. They've come up with 125,000 over what period? Is that a 12-month financial year?
Yeah, I mean, as Councillor Bates quite rightly said, bailiff use wasn't used at the beginning of the year. It restarted about September this year, so it represents just about 6 months of bailiff action.
Okay. All right. And again, I don't know if you're able to say, but do you think that we would have gotten that 125 or a proportion of it without the bailiffs visiting?
We certainly wouldn't have got all of it. Unfortunately, Councillor Bates is quite right. There is a great distinction between those that can't pay and those that won't pay.
I just saw Councillor Barnett move. So I've just... hello, Peter. Welcome back. All right, can you just give me a thumbs up that you're fine? Right, okay. Right, thank you. Okay. Sorry, Mr. Fox. Right. I was just so relieved to see Peter move there. Right.
It's no problem. As I said, there's a great difference between the can pays and the won't pays, and unfortunately, some of the people that owe us money, the only resort we have is to use enforcement agents because that's the actual nudge that they need. I have been out with bailiffs, and some people are, for whatever reason, they won't pay until the enforcement agent knocks on their door. But I think the other important factor is that when the enforcement agents knock on the door, despite all the correspondence we try prior to that, that often is the time when the enforcement agent refers them back to us for additional help because they actually identify that there is a need there. Thank you.
Okay. So it sounds like, Councillor Bates, that I have a different view, I think, from yours in terms of whether we should be using them or not. Councillor Bates and Mr. Payne?
Yeah, all I was asking for is a report on the subject. I completely take on board the points that have been made, but I think a very good point has just been made regarding additional help, which is something, again, that our hardship policy is going to be addressing this year. So it remains my view there needs to be a report on it. I can bring a motion, but as I said, I would prefer not to because I don't think that's the right forum. So I guess the question is, if you don't intend to present a report to the executive, it did sound to me as if the leader of the, or the chairman of the Performance and Finance Scrutiny Committee was willing to do that. So with his agreement, I will ask for it to go there instead because this issue, it can't carry on as it is, and we do need to have a proper look at it.
Yeah, okay. And I think Mr. Payne, and do you want to, Mr. Payne, I've got Sashi, Councillor Marvaganan waving furiously. Councillor Marvaganan?
Thank you, Leader. I'm happy to take it to the PNF and have a full discussion on this because, like I said, I've seen it about twice at least come to this council, and I've raised the concern about bailiffs. Councillor Bates has raised a concern about bailiffs. I'm also concerned of the fact that whether we have to wait till the last minute. That is my point. I mean, I do know bailiffs who actually collect, and they do come back and exactly reflect what Mr. Fox said. Yeah, they don't do it, or they don't want to pay until you walk in. We have to find a method. We have to find a method as a council, be a little bit more caring to actually help our residents, not for them not to take the liberty, but to ensure they pay. If they don't pay, we actually take actions faster than wait for the last minute.
Yeah. Okay. I think, in all honesty, Councillor Bates, I think I do accept and I appreciate the point about the executive can simply request a paper. It's not about the requesting the paper that I've got a problem with. It's the forum of the paper. So the paper comes back to the executive, and the executive is looking at it. I know we're the leadership of the council because we've been voted to that position, but I do think it is more of a cross-party item to be discussed. All right, and actually, I'm happy to open it if there's anyone else in the executive has a view, but I think the view I'm coming to is I actually think the Performance and Finance Scrutiny Committee would be a more apt committee because it's cross-party. Right, I think it can request that, can debate that, I think, better than is through the executive position. Then there will be a recommendation from the thing that we could then debate, I think would be the better view. Okay, Councillor Duggan.
Thanks, Leader. I'm quite happy that it goes to performance and audit. I do, however, support Councillor Bates. I think it's a really good idea. I suspect I would potentially come to a slightly different outcome or conclusion on what we do in that area, but I think it will highlight to everybody in a wider forum the excellent job that Mr. Fox and his team does on behalf of the council and residents in collecting council tax and business rates. It's already been mentioned, but we are one of the best in the land. There's 400 odd councils, and we're regularly top 5 for collection of council tax. That and bins, we're very good at collecting things, it would appear.
Yeah, we're good at collecting things.
But I think it would be really good. It would give Mr. Fox an opportunity to outline the work that they do, the process, because again, Councillor Mulvaggan's mentioned, and I didn't know, I mean, I've been on 14 odd years, whatever it is, doing this malarkey, and it's not until you ask the question, have it explained to you, you understand, and it's something that we do well, and it's something that we do well on behalf of all our residents. So I think it's a good idea. Let's get it in. Let's get the team to have the opportunity to showcase what they do so well, and then we can decide the best way forward.
I think that's the right format. Okay, and as you say, Councillor Mulvaggan, for me it's about balance, right? And I have to say, I was very surprised at £125,000 collected through bill. I wasn't expecting a number anything like that size. Okay, so I think that's the right one. So Councillor Bates, if you're in agreement, I'd be happy for that to go to P&F.
I'm comfortable with that. I just want there to be this discussion over the next year. Okay,
I think it's a worthwhile discussion. Okay, right. Are there any other questions on the writing off of the bad debts? No. Okay. So we.
Yes. Sorry, Leader. I've had my hand up for a while. You probably can't see me because I turned the video off. So.
Sorry.
Sorry. No. It's absolutely fine. Let me just lower my hand. I think really it was just to pick up a point that has been raised by Councillor Bates in the past and in a different forum. And that is that when it comes to the writing off of bad debts, it's just for assurance publicly and for also the support of the executive that we do at the very first time that somebody is late with paying their council tax, we do write to them, putting them in contact with the agencies that can support them with debt management. And I know that that's something that we've raised in other forums, but just to have the assurance on that. And then actually there are a couple of debts here that I would like to pick up in under part 2 as well.
Right. So let me just pick up on your first question then. Yes, Councillor Bates raised that, and I think it came up through the poverty working group. I spoke to Councillor Lewis. Councillor Lewis has taken this as an action, is discussing this with the officers, and I think we're at the point where we do inform, but if I can just use the phrase automatic letter, that is not part of our procedures at this point, and we're working towards making that part of our procedures. Is that correct, Councillor Lewis? Is that a fair summary?
Good summation. Yes.
Yep. Okay. So I think it's a good suggestion. It's a good suggestion on two parts. One is that it's less traumatic for the person who's receiving the demand for debt. It also is good for us because we more often than not get a better outcome in terms of people agreeing payment terms, etc., and we get the debt paid down, albeit over a period of time. But that's better than it not being paid at all. So I think that there's a win-win there for us doing that, and I think it's going to become part of our procedures. Okay, and I'm hoping that will be very soon. Okay, right. Okay. If you have questions on part 2, then I'm not going to go for the recommendation yet. What I think we'll do is we'll go on to item 10, the exclusion of press and public, and we'll bring the meeting into private, and then we will open up item 9 again for your questions, Councillor Wheeler.
Okay, we're just going to stop the live stream. We'll let you know as soon as it has stopped, but we are live at the minute until it has actually stopped. Thank you.
Okay, thank you to